Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And it's my pleasure to welcome today Art Mesher, who's the CEO of Descartes Systems Group. I've known Art for a long time. He's had a long and distinguished career in a variety of different roles in the supply chain logistics industry, from technology to being an industry analyst. And he was also the 2008 CSCMP Distinguished Service Award recipient. So very glad to have him on the show today to talk about his technology outlook for 2013 and beyond, which he calls the next big thing in supply chain logistics and software as a service, the rise of Entrusts. So we're going to find out what Entrusts are all about and kind of what his outlook is in just a minute here. But first, I just want to welcome everyone who's joining us today and just remind you that part of our goal here at Talking Logistics is to make this interactive. So as we're having our conversation here, if you've got some questions for Art, submit them via the Submit a Question button, and I'll be happy to try to weave them into the conversation here. Also, in the spirit of full disclosure, I just want to mention that Descartes is a sponsor of Talking Logistics, as well as our blog, Logistics Viewpoints. So, Art, great to have you on the program today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, let's before we get into kind of what is an Entrust, let's kind of build up to it. I kind of joke sometimes to say, you've been out of the analyst. We can take Art out of the analyst world, but we can't take the analyst out of you. So I think you went back to your Gartner days there and wrote a very interesting and thought-provoking article a couple of weeks ago, which we published on Logistics Viewpoints, and you've got a more complete version on your website. And it certainly provided a lot of food for thought, and in terms of your industry outlook and what you saw, moving ahead in technology in particular in the years ahead. Some of it I think was not only thought provoking, but maybe a little bit controversial, or maybe worthy of a little bit of debate. So that was part of the main reason why I wanted to have on today. One of the points that you make, let's start here with kind of just a little bit of a background or backdrop. One of the points that you make is that the definition of permanence in business relationships is changing. You say, and I'm going to read it here, the new permanence might be best described as doing lots of temporary and or different things for long periods of time with the same people, as opposed to the old permanence of doing the same thing with the same people all the time. So do you believe that this is true, or this is happening across all industries? And how does this change the way companies then evaluate and select, their business partners?
Yeah, well, sure. I probably would have to start off by saying if I didn't think it was true, I probably wouldn't have wrote it. But I think the answer is always in segmentation, right? So whenever you discuss things in the supply chain, it's always important to understand that, some segments have different behaviors than others. So whenever you make a holistic comment like I've made, you do need to drill down and have some discussion on which segments are more effective, which segments are less effective, to try to put context to it. So I appreciate the question, because I think the answer is in some detail. Now let's first put the statement in context. What I said first was there's a factorial increase of transparency. You are now have nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, and your performance and your behaviors and your ability to find a competitor, or your customer to find a competitor to do what you do, your ability to protect yourself with innovation, all those things are changing really rapidly. Product life cycles are collapsing. I mean, you could come up with the coolest new gizmo, and 18 months later, somebody's absolutely pounding into the pavement and commoditizing it. The same thing happens with service providers. Now, I don't want to mention names, but there is a service provider, a very large one I would call a whale, who still says that if you electronically exchange information with them, you are not allowed to audit their rates electronically. Now, can you believe that? That to this day, someone has said, I'll serve you under a contract. I'll give you your information electronically, but you can't audit me. Well, in today's rise of factorial increase of transparency, things are starting to leak out about whales' behavior on pricing and price protection. And again, I don't want to mention names, but these people have nowhere to run and nowhere to hide anymore. And what's going to happen is, because of this transparency, I believe relationships will be redefined. I think the most obvious obvious one is showrooming. The most obvious one is, what is the role of a retail store and what is the role of retail distribution? And what role then? Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I can price shop you and buy it over the internet due to the notion of retail relationships. It's absolutely destroying them as we speak. So that's a segment that has a lot going on. I would say another segment that really has issues is the component assembly material marketplaces. Anywhere we have discrete component assembly. Because the product may be only last a year, and then they create a new product with a whole bunch of new component suppliers. So if you want to be a component supplier, you need to have serial relationships based on each product launch your customer has. And that may be easier said than done. And on the other side, if you're a component assembler, you may want to change your sources on the fly, maybe because of a hurricane. You may want to have multiple partners that this month you build from this guy, 6 months later you acquire components from another guy, and maybe it is because of a hurricane. Now, how do you assemble and disassemble rapidly and quickly, creating new trading partners to meet short shelf life, high velocity products? And in our view, what you need to do is join a club. You need to join someone who's going to make sure that you can assemble and disassemble, that you can collaborate, communicate, have command and control across that global supply chain. So retail, discrete component assemblers, very different markets, but two markets where that transparency is really going to affect business. And the third, I think, is our carriers and our service provider industry. I think that transparency is going to create a lot of cherry picking, and the transparency is going to make lots of people accountable who haven't had to be so accountable because they were just too big to fail, if you will, or maybe too big to rebate your money if they failed.
Right. No, good point. I mean, the part that resonated with me when you talked about the new permanence is, particularly in the 3PL industry, it reminded me of a comment that the director of logistics at the time, I'm not sure if he's still there, over at Diageo said at a conference that I put together a few years back on 3PL customer relationships. And I remember I used to have this quote in a lot of my presentations because I thought it was spot on. He said, what I look for in a 3PL partner is, someone that's going to be able to, grow with me and be able to respond quickly to my changing needs. So, I mean, his point was, I may be contracting with you today or establishing a relationship with you today to do X, but, a year from now, 2 years from now, I may come back to you needing you to help me with Y, right? Because I may have introduced a new product, or I might be, entering a new, market segment, a new channel. And what I need from a service provider is, the fact that we have an established relationship and there's trust and so on and so forth, but I need you to pivot along with me. And I think that's what I kind of heard you say in your piece as well.
Reconfiguration. Like, I believe now, if you look at the logistics landscape and you look at these 3PLs, it's not their ability to win business. It's their ability to be agile and to reconfigure their service networks to support the constantly changing needs of their customers. And I don't think our large 3PLs are as agile as people think. And their ability to reconfigure supply chains on a dime on behalf of their customer, it's very difficult. It's hard enough to get a contract negotiated with these people as much as have them move quickly.
Yeah, well, speaking of 3PLs, I want to move on to my next question now. One of the things that historically, when we talk about being able to, change and enable new processes or new networks, one of the limiting factors for a lot of companies, especially 3PLs, was what I called inflexible IT systems. These are systems that were developed, on outdated and proprietary technology, and just, the ability to make a change sometimes would take them, months and countless IT resources just to make a simple, what would generally be considered a simple process change. In fact, this is something I wrote about on the blog yesterday. And certainly we've seen with service-oriented architectures and kind of this move away from proprietary languages to more standards-based architecture has certainly helped. But you write in the piece that despite that, quote, many of the systems created in the last decade will become extremely obsolete over the next decade. Which systems specifically are you talking about? And, why will they become not just obsolete, but in your words, extremely obsolete?
Well, first of all, let's take it generically. And again, segmentation matters. So, if you have a system that's updating, slots of inventory to control records of inventory, and you're keeping count of what's in your warehouse, you might be able to live with something that's pretty old and pretty static. But if you want to become the greatest manager of labor, and you want to become the greatest, most effective with control systems, there's a lot of changes going on at the control system level of warehouse management systems right now. The real issues come down to a couple things. First of all, the tools that we have available now to build this generation of software, which is I call network-aware systems. The tools that we have to build network-aware systems are significantly different than the tools we had 5 years from now and 5 years ago. And some of the tools that are just starting to come out right now on the OpenStack, open database world, these tools are really going to change how we construct software. This has to do with how it performs and what it costs to keep it performing. So if you built something 8 or 10 years ago, maybe it does its job, but it's going to become much more expensive to modify. It's going to become much more expensive to own than the next generation of software that is built in, much more modern tools, which are, I call network-aware tools. So fundamentally, you can always preserve what you have. And so don't misinterpret. I'm not saying that they are going to all need to be thrown away. I'm just saying they're not competitive. They're obsolete. Listen, I still use a cassette player. I have an old car. It's got a cassette player, and it works. And I'm not going to throw away my cassettes, nor am I throwing away my VHA tapes. I'm not throwing those things away, but I don't use them that often. And if I do use them, I'm sure they're not, competing with them. Hey, come over and watch my VCR. Right? So the issue is, what kind of systems are competitive? What will people need to have in the future to maintain this agile world? The simplest example I know how to give you is just think about the mobile environment. Just think 3 years ago about what your user interface looked like on your mobile devices, and think about what the user interfaces look like today in a mobile application. Now the ability to buy a platform and a bring your own device model that will support any device and be secure, and you can program once and run across, a heterogeneous set of devices. We didn't have those tools 3 years ago. So if we built mobile extensions even 3 years ago, we're going to have to rebuild those applications. And at Descartes, we're rebuilding our applications all the time. There's a reason we spend 19% in R&D.
Yeah, no, I think you kind of touched upon kind of some follow-up questions I had. I mean, let's assume you're right, in terms of this, the solutions coming up. So, how does that change then? Companies have made huge, there's a lot of sunk costs out there, with companies that have invested a lot of money in a lot of these IT applications that, are rapidly evolving and changing. And they continue to invest in some of these applications, whether it's from, maintaining them and so on and so forth. So what's the path forward for, the CIO or those that are, looking to manage, their investments moving forward, with technology? And likewise, I think you already hit upon it, for software vendors, right? You've got solutions that were developed, over a long period of time. How are you going to, the implication is that a lot of those solutions are also becoming, obsolete. So what do you do?
Well, first of all, the first issue really is the answer is serial continuous reinvestment. One of the biggest problems in our industry is we think we go to the store once and we buy a platform from a vendor and it just works. And you know what? That's just a wrong way to look at it. The reality is that we're always going to have to be investing in new systems. And if you understand Moore's Law and Metcalfe's Law, I don't need to go into them today here, but those two laws are extremely prevalent in this industry. So if you don't reinvest in technology stacks every 3 to 5 years, you're dealing with a computing cost which is not competitive. At the end of the day, the cost to do the work every 3 to 5 years goes down very significantly as we're able to harness our microprocessors. So we have to be cost effective. Logistics businesses, by definition, somewhat need to be a low cost provider. I've had a blackout here, guys. I don't know what. Oh, sorry. Okay, we're good. Yeah. So one of the key things here is you have to continuously invest all the time. Then the next thing to do I would look at is I would say, what systems are we just going to encapsulate? What systems are so old and so ugly that we don't want to touch them? We just want to put a wrapper around them, and we want to be able to send and receive information, but we really don't want to expose their data. And we want to insulate them. We refer to this in our company as the little old ladies. If we touch them, they tend to slap us. So we just leave them alone. But they're good grandparents. They always give us money, and when we need an allowance, as long as we take care of them, they're fine. So I think you have to kind of look at which ones you're going to insulate and which ones you're going to encapsulate. The biggest issue is going to be internet awareness, the network awareness, the change of systems to be network aware, and how people exchange data in a network aware world is really going to change how you build systems. A classic example is, let's just take load tendering in the logistics, in the TMS business. We're all happy that we can exchange loads with carriers, and we're all happy that they come back by email and say they would take them. And, well, that's interesting. What if we knew the guy was on the network and we knew where his truck was, and because we knew where he was and where his truck was, then we'd say, we want this load going on this vehicle. Well, that's interesting. But what if the carrier said to you, if I could have seen into your shipment profile, I could have positioned the truck. 8 days ago, I turned down the load. That had I known you had this load, I would have took it. And I would really wish I could see into your data and kind of see what you're doing over the next couple of weeks, because if I could see what you're doing, I'm going to have to be able to put my resources where you need them. Now, I'm pretty sure most people's systems haven't built where the carriers can just go up in the morning and see what you're going to do for the next couple of weeks. But I'm also pretty sure it's not a bad idea. So the real issue is, how do we build systems that allow people to see what they need to see and not see what they need to see at a community level? And this is where an Entrust can come in, where he can register parties to the network. He can ensure that data that you want someone to see can be seen, but he can also make sure that data you don't want someone to see won't be seen. And this is where this third-party shared service network, I believe, will really start to come into play.
Yeah, and you just touched upon Entrusts. So let me kind of get into it now. So we've talked about kind of the rapid changing in what's happening with business relationships, what's happening with the technology, and how fast that's changing and evolving. And in that kind of context, you say that we're seeing the birth of a new type of company, the Entrust, that, in your words, will help businesses guarantee outcomes and ensure against failures by maintaining the most competitive environment for process management and systems enabling best-in-class communication, collaboration, and compliance. And in your piece, you highlight several kind of examples of Entrusts, Nulogy, Edo-Open, SPS Commerce, and of course Descartes. But I think some people still might have a hard time understanding these terms, Entrust and network, centric and things like that. So I think the best way is probably to give a specific example of a supply chain or a logistics process, and how companies manage it today in the absence of an Entrust, and perhaps what are some of the limitations or challenges, and then how would that process look like if you were to use an Entrust, and how is it different, and what are the benefits, going that route?
Well, let me just first start off and apologize to all my supply chain guys out there. I did start unloading trucks, so I didn't always talk like this. But, this paper really is the paper that I've written really is a technical extension to the work that I wrote in 1991 and did at Gartner on federated computing. And federated computing is a way to manage heterogeneous distributed systems. Now, that's a lot of big words, but what we're really trying to talk about is the logistics network. The world that we all live in is full of different people. It's not all brown trucks fully integrated across the world. The airplane doesn't pull up to your apartment building. The airplane needs to work with the trucker needs to work with the airline needs to work with the freight forwarder, and they all need to get along, and they all need to share information, because actually logistics is done with a group of people who federate together to serve a customer. And I believe that form needed to follow function, that if you were going to have federations of people networking together to serve customers, that the computing environment that was going to serve them should be a federating network, right? And what I'm really discussing now is how the role of federated computers is going to move to a business model. So it used to be someone implement a service-oriented architecture and federate systems and all the stuff that people talk about in the 90s. But it's emerged to where now a business will really run this for you. And the answer, so why is that? Well, first thing is it's hard to be good at IT unless you're an IT company. You know, and we've all heard forever how great every 3PL is, and every new company that's out there in the logistics industry has the best technology in the world, and it's all integrated everywhere. And I think everyone's heard me discuss that presentation that starts off. Like the title is, it's the great big lie, right? Because even the largest logistics companies in the world have 20 to 60 different ERP systems. And the littlest one may have one, but just because he started last week doesn't mean it's the best. It just happens to be the newest. And in my world, new means it doesn't work so well, and old means it works pretty well. So we have to balance all that together. But the reality is it's hard to be good at IT unless you're an IT company. Now, to be good at IT for a community is a completely, increased playing field. So when you really want to network people to share information, things change. Now let me give an example to put it in simple terms. So airlines put stuff on their plane and they bring it into the United States. But the reality is the airline doesn't sell those customers directly. They sell freight forwarders. So now if the U.S. government says, I want to know what's on your airplane, they say to the airline, you got to tell me what's on your plane. They said, great, it's 66 skids from some shakers. And that really doesn't help anyone know for Homeland Security purposes what's going on. So they don't want the shakers master bill relating. They want to see all the house bills from the forwarder. So they say to the airline says to the forwarder, all right, you got to tell me everyone who's shipping. And the forwarder says, I'm not going to tell you who my customers are. I don't want you to know who my customers are. I don't want you to back solicit me. Now, in the meantime, some guy in Homeland Security sits there and says he doesn't really, I don't care about your family dysfunction. I want to know what's on your airplane. So you and the forwarder better figure it out. So then you can put an interest in place, like Descartes, where we collect all of the house bill of ladings and all of the master bill of ladings from the forwarder. We submit all of the data to the U.S. government by airplane, but we don't allow the airline to see who the house bills are. We allow the government to see who the house bills are, but we don't allow the airline. So we protect our parties. And by role-based access control, we became the Entrust, where most airlines now around the world use our company to connect to their freight forwarders, to collect all the information that they need, to submit to governments their cargo clearances. Why? Because no one wants to compete against this. We don't need to have degrees of safety. We need to have it safe. And so we're not going to compete on degrees of safety. We're going to have it safe. And everyone just wants it to be safe. So if there's that one guy you can trust who can collect all that information and do it at the lowest cost into his market because he has the most volume and he operates well, reinvesting in his technology every 3 to 5 years, making things cheaper over time, as we discussed earlier, then you become that one place that everyone will go to handle their work. And this is just an example in Descartes, but I think you're familiar with Neurology. I know I've mentioned them before. They have a very similar philosophy of how a CPG gets connected to 1,000 co-packers and how we can standardize the co-packing industry. To open another good example in fast-moving, short shelf life industries like consumer electronics and apparel, where they have a network of people together, and they're that one place you can go where you can exchange orders, collaborate and forecast, track and manage your shipments, and plug and unplug as needed with their memberships. So there's just a few examples.
Going back to the point you made in terms of the best companies at IT are IT companies, and are you suggesting? Where do you draw the line then between what kind of technology companies ought to invest in and have within their own four walls versus what kind of technology or systems ought to reside, at an Entrust. I mean, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, at least this is my view, is that for systems or solutions that enable supply chain logistics processes that are inherently network-centric, meaning that involve many external parties, whether there's customers, suppliers, customs, 3PLs, so on and so forth, that the Entrust model or the network-centric model makes sense. Whereas if the applications are more behind the four walls or internally focused, we're, for example, maybe a warehouse management system, and you can argue whether a WMS is an inside the four walls thing, or if there's characteristics of it that will make it more network-centric. But there I would say predominantly a warehouse management system is to manage the operations of.
Yeah, I agree. I've also, Adrian, you froze here on my network, so I don't. But let me discuss this in a couple different areas. The first really has to do again with some segmentation. So what I did is I built a 2x2 matrix. They call them Gartner Magic Quadrants, but I'm not there anymore. So I'll call it a 2x2 matrix. And on one axis, I just define, I have departmental computing going to enterprise computing, going to extended enterprise computing like an extranet or a marketplace portal, into inter-enterprise computing. So that's your lowest access. And then on the up and down axis, I've discussed what I'll call the degree of standards that need to be encapsulated. Right? So if you're dealing with this whole potpourri of standards, whether you have governments giving you standards and customers giving you standards and suppliers giving you standards and industry associations giving you standards, and the computing problem involves inter-enterprises, airlines, trucking companies, steamship lines, freight forwarders. If you have the inter-enterprise problem and lots of standards, then you probably need a federator. If you have departmental computing and you only got a couple things to worry about standards-wise, you definitely can deal with, what I would call on-premise computing, right? But the issue, again, with on-premise computing, let's take a WMS. So WMS means a lot of things to a lot of people, right? But the reality is the control system layer of WMSs is really being impacted right now by new technology breakthroughs. So the ability to deal with programmable logical controllers on the fly and to be able to reconfigure these systems, it's changing how a control system is built. I think Redworks is probably an example of a vendor who's exploiting that little niche within the larger WMS marketplace. Now let's take dock, door, and yard management, which, really funnels an inbound label scheduling process, but is completely dependent on external data. So, the ability to change how goods flow. So right now, goods are pushed into a distribution center. A carrier wakes up every day, traps his freight, an LTL guy brings a whole trailer of stuff into your dock. But what if you make it an external situation where you can see all of your LTL shipments arriving at your LTL carrier because you have complete visibility into the supplier network, and then you can tell the LTL carrier how you want your trailers loaded and pull your LTL freight through your distribution center like CVS does. All right, now that takes this internal thing, which we call the WMS. If we look all around it, at the control system layer, or at the external dock, door, yard scheduling moving from push to pull, that starts to really put a lot of pressure on that four-wall thing that isn't network aware. And it may isolate it. So, not saying it shouldn't have a WMS, but you might stop looking at that WMS to do dock, door, and yard, because why do you make this thing that's really reading logic controllers and debiting and crediting inventory and dispatching a finite set of work, known labor, known forklifts? Why would you use that same system to manage and control a flow of work that is constantly changing and is anything but finite? Right? So the need for the WMS to become network aware may force you to encapsulate your WMS and look at a set of new vendors to handle your control system layers or your external layers. Again, what used to be permanent, we all got it from one guy, may end up being, let's encapsulate that guy. There's nothing wrong with what he's doing, but those systems really aren't aware enough, network aware enough, for us to build the rest of our platform off of. I would never build my platforms on my WMS, ever. It's got a function and that's it.
Right. No, interesting, perspective there. One of the other comments I, sometimes get when I, some of the writing that I did about a decade ago that kind of is parallel to what you wrote about Entrusts is, supply chain operating networks. And, some of the comments I get sometimes is like, Adrian, isn't that, similar to kind of the marketplaces and exchanges people were talking about back in the, late 90s, early 2000, the whole dot-com boom, where new ventures like Covisint in the automotive industry, they were supposed to, bring together all the automotive OEMs and their suppliers and so on and so forth and kind of transform the way supply chains, worked. And those, but for the most part, a lot of those ventures just went by the wayside. So sometimes some of the pushback that I get or some of the comments I get is, isn't this just kind of history repeating itself? Is this any different from, the marketplaces and exchanges people were talking about back, 10, 12, 13 years ago?
Well, first of all, maybe it's not different conceptually because it is about, companies, collaborating across networks. The tools that we have today to build these systems are so different than the tools we had back then. The concepts were kind of right, but the execution was really wrong. The execution was wrong in two areas. One, the technology wasn't ready, but it was also wrong at the business level. So if you go back to this history that you and I are familiar with, most of these exchanges were, a whole bunch of companies coming together. That all competed against each other. They were loosely knit confederations of warring factions. Chemical companies all band together to create Alemica. And a whole bunch of companies all come together to create I don't remember the retail one anymore. I think it's called the Gentrix now. WWRE or whoever these guys were. And, the reality is I think that socialism and capitalism don't mix very well. And to have these socialistic businesses where 5 or 6 competitors, I bought GFX off of a bunch of airlines, where all the airlines got together, they wanted to automate bookings. And, socialism and making money doesn't work really well. So, the business models weren't right along with the technology, not being ready. And we have a much different world today of what I'll call network awareness and systems that didn't exist then. Again, the problem is most systems aren't built yet to be network aware, but the need to have communities compute, I think that has always been there. History shows us something else, Adrian. If you look at the Sabre system, and if you look at when they developed Sabre, they had to build a new real-time operating system. It's something that was called TPF. And when you want to create real-time systems across communities, history has shown that you need a new technical system to do that. The systems that exist in the market were sold to enterprises. Nobody woke up and said, I'm going to go sell an operating system to a community. So if you want to manage a community, you have to build a real-time operating system. You just can't go down the street and buy one. And that was what we learned when we built Sabre and why we built TPF, which is probably to this day the largest and fastest real-time operating system out in the industry. If you Wikipedia, this TPF system, you can read all about it for anyone listening. But that analog exists today. Those companies that are trying to create that real-time platform across the community actually have to build the technical infrastructure to support that you just can't go to the store and get. And this is where I come back to, you need to be good at IT. And you need to be an IT company to be good at IT. Most people don't even understand they need to build these infrastructures and are running around telling everyone they have real-time systems that run across the globe 7x24 while they still send their data in batch to GSX's EDI network. So, what really goes on and what people really do are still pretty different.
Yeah, no, good point. We got a question here from one of the attendees. I'm going to put it up on the screen, which I think is a good question. And the question is, changing the subject slightly in light of the Chinese hacking of DOE, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. So a lot of this cyber terrorism that's taking place out there, isn't the consolidation of corporate business system, make for a much more desirable target? So, I guess that the question is more around now that you've got these Entrusts that have all this data flowing through it. Won't these Entrusts become a bigger target for hackers and those that try to create havoc online?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm going to say something I've always said is if you want to come up with a reason to not do something, you can blame security. So, it's the greatest excuse to not act that's out there. So now the question is, are we going to be as secure, less secure, or more secure than what our customers use? Now, at Descartes, we take this matter pretty seriously. We run the U.S. export system for the U.S. Department of Census. And because of that, we have very severe security hurdles that we have to cross in order, to provision systems appropriately. I am quite sure that all of us can be hacked. At any time, anywhere, any one of us, if someone wants to hack us, they can. So I'm not going to really hide behind that other than to say that, I think if you aggregate resources together, you're more likely to build systems that are less hackable than if you go out on your own. And I still think we're better than our customers, and I think that's what matters most. As long as we can be better than our customer environment, then we're a better place to go. And most of our customers shouldn't even have an IT department, to be candid with you. They do, but most of them should not. We should really leave this to the big guys. And everyone else really should find trusted parties who could run their environments.
Great. Jim, thank you for your question. And just a reminder, if anybody else has a question for Art, please submit it via the Submit a Question button. I'm going to transition a little bit. You talked, you just mentioned some technical aspects of this. When a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed Jim Matcham, who's the director of logistics at a leading B2B company. And I talked to him about the role of technology in helping him get his job done. And he said, he didn't really care if the technology was within his four walls or as a service out in the cloud. All he really cared about was having the information he needed when he wanted it, in the right context so that he can make, smarter decisions faster and then be able to execute those decisions as quickly and efficiently as possible. I think that many supply chain executives probably think along the same lines. Do you agree? And if so, should supply chain executives care about Entrusts, or is this more of a CIO technical community type of topic?
Well, Adrian, I think you've just been through an experience that I'm going to pick on a little bit here, but how did it feel to not have electricity? Did you power go out where you were? With the snowstorm?
The power didn't go out, but I did lose internet access yesterday. It was storm related.
All you want is your power to be on and your computers to run, and you have access to the information you want to do your job every day. That's all you want. And I get it. And, I'm pretty sure you probably take for granted your power company and your internet provider, and you don't really realize what's going on till you don't have it. Now, I understand the supply chain manager could care less as long as he gets what he needs when he wants it. If the question is, what does he need and when is he getting it? And what is it going to take to get that? And again, I don't know how competitive this company is. I don't know if it's the least cost producer. I don't know what its IT infrastructure costs are. But one thing I can tell you is that every 5 years, it gets a lot cheaper to run your stuff. So whatever you're running, whatever your systems are, if every 5 years you can reinvest, it's cheaper for you. Now, if you need to have things be cheaper over time, then you need to reinvest. If you don't care, it doesn't matter. Right? I think the reality is that our supply chain executives have a great opportunity to be insulated from the issues that are involved in having a world-class information technology infrastructure. So the question becomes, is it about gaining more customers and more market share, or is it about having the lowest cost environment? And if a customer walked up to this guy and said, hey, I don't want you to ship anymore in full pallet quantities. I want you to ship in floor-ready environment where you give me a mixed pallet and I don't want it to go through my distribution center. I want you to bring truckloads of floor-ready product in right before your ad it runs in my circular. Okay, and then someone's going to say, no, we can't do that. Our systems don't allow us to do that. We're not able to create mixed pallets and run them in truckloads bypassing our distribution center. So now what would that executive say? Because he needs to have this capability to compete, and he doesn't have it. So, yeah, he just wants when he wants where he wants it. I don't think he cares whether it's in a cloud or on the floor or under his desk. Right? But as business change and customers' requirements change, the question is how fast can that environment change along with it? And again, it depends on who this company is and how competitive they are.
Right. Well, I'm going to shift gears. We're kind of running out of time here. I just want to just remind everyone when I asked this last question. If you've got a question for Art, a question or comment for Art, just post it, and we'll try to sneak it in. But kind of to completely shift gears here, one of the questions I like to ask, my guests, assuming that there are some students or young professionals that are watching this, either live or at some point on demand, is you've had like I mentioned at the outset, you've had a long kind of and diverse career here. What advice would you give to students or young professionals that are just getting started in this industry? About some of the things they should be doing today, to kind of pave the path to have a successful career down the road?
Listen, let me answer that question in a second. I'm reading some dialogue here on the side, on the messaging side. And there's a debate starting about good data and bad data. And this is a great discussion. This is at the essence of it. So one of the things that we do in our airlines and freight forwarders, they have their own standard to monitor data quality. And there's an initiative that was called Cargo 2000 where we actually build software that analyzes the effectiveness and efficiency of the data that's coming from everybody. And look, I tell you, when you start up a community, their data's crappy. But if you monitor it all the time, every time, and you put standards in place with statistical process control, over time that data becomes very high quality. And that's one of the roles of the Entrusts, to police all the members, to make sure that they have good data. And if they have bad data, knock them on the wrist a couple times. Or, more importantly, create processes that facilitate the data getting better over time. So I think the discussion here and the message queue is a good one. Now to the answer to your question. I actually believe in something very advice, which is don't stop learning.
Yeah, you're back on.
And when I use learning is an acronym for me. Learning means listen, educate, articulate, research, and network. And if you can be, those are the things you need to do. Never stop learning. Be a great listener. There's things you can learn from everyone. It's really important to educate. Really important to educate people. Supply chain is an industry where executive involvement is great, but the worst thing you can ever have is an uneducated executive in supply chain getting involved. Because if they don't know where they're going, they're surely going to take you there. So it's your job to make sure that your senior executives are educated in supply chain, because they're not going to be all the time. And that's where you can add so much value in your companies, by being the one to educate others. And articulating, Adrian, you and I are people who publish every once in a while for a living, really less often than you two. But I can't stress for any of you out there how important it is to articulate your beliefs and your values, and to publish a white paper in an industry or publish something around your company. Articulating is very, very important. And researching, again, if you can always be looking and always have an open mind and never shut the door, you're generally going to find out that you're going to go somewhere that you should have gone, that you wouldn't have gone if you weren't looking to go. And then networking with everybody, we all meet each other. We can all learn from each other, be a good, humble human being, and be approachable and approach other people and network together and enjoy the camaraderie of the group of us who actually, care about logistics and supply chain, because we're somewhat a rare few. And, if you can listen, educate, articulate, research, and network, and just keep learning, you'll have a great career. That's my advice.
Great, Art. Well, I think those are all great bits of advice there for folks. And we're at the end of our time here, but I certainly want to thank you for your time and a great conversation. I want to invite all of you who participated. First of all, I want to thank those of you that asked questions and participated in some of the chat there. If you've got questions and additional comments for Art, feel free to go ahead and go to talkinglogistics.com and post your comments there, and we can keep the conversation going there. Like I say every week, go ahead and mark your calendars for every Thursday at noon, because we'll have some great guests just like Art. Some weeks it'll just be me, sharing my views and thoughts on a particular topic. Actually, next Thursday, we're not going to have an episode because it's school vacation week, and I'm going to be taking a vacation day. But the weeks after that, we've got some great guests lined up, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. So, Art, again, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks. Keep up the good work. And if anyone wants to read all the details of this paper, you can go up to Descartes.com's website and get filled up with a bunch of technical stuff that on distributed network processing. But Adrian, keep up the good work. You're doing a great job promoting what we do here. Glad to be able to help you.
Great. Well, thank you, Art. I appreciate your support of what I'm doing here. And again, thank you, everyone. Thanks. Have a great day, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode. Bye-bye.